Today, we're covering a topic that was very well requested, and there's a lot of conversation around this out there. So I was thrilled to be adding our 2 cents in. And today, what we're going to be covering is menopause. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. So perimenopause and menopause are not just hormonal transitions. They're neurological transformations. From a neuroscience perspective, the most notable hormone players, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, don't just regulate reproduction. They're powerful neurotransmitter modulators, especially in the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotion, memory, and survival. As estrogen begins to fluctuate and decline, so does its stabilizing effect on key brain chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. This helps explain why so many women report increased anxiety, mood swings, brain fog, sleep disruption, sudden emotional flooding. They're not simply hormonal symptoms. They're signs of a nervous system trying to recalibrate without its usual chemical anchors. But there's also good news. This time of transition opens a unique window of neuroplasticity. Just like adolescence, menopause is a neurological remapping period, a time when the brain is especially responsive to rewiring. When guided intentionally, as with mind change techniques, this window can be used to repattern emotional triggers, release inherited trauma, create powerful new neural pathways of self-trust, worthiness, and inner authority. So rather than a slow decline, perimenopause is a chance to rebuild your inner architecture from survival-based functioning to sovereign embodiment. I don't know about you, but I have heard a lot of stories about menopause. Probably since I was young, I started to hear stories about the change and a lot of references to women acting crazy because of menopause. To understand why so many women dread menopause today, we have to zoom out. Across cultures and history, menopause hasn't always been feared. In fact, in many indigenous and ancient societies, menopause marked a rite of passage into spiritual power and social authority. In traditional Chinese medicine, post-menopausal women are considered to return to a more neutral yin-yang state, allowing them to focus on wisdom and inner balance. Among Native American tribes, menopausal women became keepers of medicine and counsel, no longer bound by the physical duties of childbearing. In early Celtic traditions, the crone archetype was not a hag to be feared, but a truth teller and a seer. So what happened? Enter the Western medical model, driven by patriarchal values and pharmaceutical interests. By the mid-20th century, menopause was being framed as a disease state to be managed, or a hormonal deficiency to be corrected, a loss of youth, fertility, value. Estrogen wasn't seen as a natural rhythm to honor. It was treated like something women were losing. This led to the aggressive marketing of hormone replacement therapy as a way to fix women rather than to support them through transformation. And perhaps even more damaging was the social messaging that came along with it, like aging equals irrelevance, menopause equals a loss of desirability, emotionality equals instability. This cultural narrative compounded women's suffering by layering shame on top of biology. It taught women to fear what should have been seen as a rite of renewal. At Mind Change, we challenge that entire premise. We believe menopause is not a deficiency, It's an upgrade, but only if we reclaim the story. Remember, in Mind Change, we're not just looking to make symptoms go away. We can do that, and most people experience a complete relief from what they work on. But our deeper goal is to learn to listen when the body speaks, not shut it up. In fact, many women have been shutting up for far too long. Yes, something is happening biologically. Hormones are actually changing, but far from what we've heard and been taught to believe. It doesn't have to equal symptomatic hell. Plenty of women out there, even in our current culture and climate, have navigated menopause beautifully. So, what else might be contributing to this idea that menopause is something to be feared and survived? Well, this is where most conversations about menopause miss the mark. Yes, perimenopause is a natural hormonal transition, but many of the extreme symptoms we associate with it, like debilitating anxiety, rage, insomnia, burnout, those aren't purely biological. They tend to be exaggerated by trauma. So let's talk a little bit about the science behind this. So we have this thing called the HPA axis, and that stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And that's our body's central stress response system. It regulates cortisol and communicates directly with the ovaries. Chronic stress keeps this axis overactivated, causing the adrenal glands to pick up the slack when ovaries start slowing down. Here's the catch. When you've been running on stress hormones for decades due to trauma, hypervigilance, people-pleasing, or your particular survival mode, then your system becomes depleted. So when the ovaries begin their natural winding down process, the adrenals can't support the transition. This creates what feels like a crash, emotionally, physically, and hormonally. This is the difference between a woman's whose body is regulated, supported, and safe, and a woman whose body has been in overdrive, possibly since childhood. That can be contributed from trauma from childhood. That can be from neglect, perfectionism, emotional suppression, or generational shame. Those things don't just go away. It builds up. And menopause oftentimes becomes the breaking point. The body's demand to stop holding it all together. That's why some women breeze through menopause with minimal disruption, while others feel like they're falling apart. The difference isn't willpower or even necessarily hormones. It's nervous system conditioning. And as we know in Mind Change, nervous system conditioning comes from subconscious programming. That's where Mind Change comes in. We help uncover the emotional and subconscious drivers, keeping your system stuck in overdrive so that your body can finally regulate, integrate, and move through this season or any season with grace. When we view menopause through the Mind Change lens, it becomes clear. This isn't just about what your ovaries are doing now. It's about what your nervous system has learned from decades. Now let's get clear on one critical truth. Menopause is not the villain. The villain is, if we can really call it a villain, the problem would be our subconscious programming, the stuff that we've been storing, probably since childhood, or maybe even carrying ancestrally or genetically that isn't even really ours. It's the stuff that's been passed down that wasn't able to heal before. Of course, this leads to a dysregulated nervous system. And a dysregulated nervous system most often comes from that childhood programming. This is a mind program, a mind problem that eventually plays out in the body. So here's how that works. Your nervous system is like the hormonal gatekeeper. That HPA axis that we were talking about before, it governs our stress responses. And that is what's directly linked to cortisol production. It also affects our ovarian hormone regulation, like estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. It also contributes to our sleep and wake cycles, our metabolism, our immune response, our emotional regulation. So in a regulated body, or what we might call someone who either has healed a lot of their childhood programming or maybe has processed that and dealt with it in a regulated way throughout their life, that HPA axis adapts to the hormonal transitions of perimenopause and menopause with fluidity. But when your nervous system has spent years or decades in sympathetic overdrive, also known as fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, then our entire system becomes fragile. Chronic stress can hijack the menopausal transition. Think about it. Most people today run on caffeine, cortisol, and anxiety. They have unresolved emotional trauma or attachment wounds, and they rarely experience true parasympathetic rest. And that's a state that we really need for healing. So when our hormones begin to decline, then our body is already inflamed, exhausted, disconnected from safety. So that would mean that we're entering into menopause on a systemic deficit. Menopause doesn't break the body. It exposes what hasn't been healed. So why would this make symptoms worse? Well, let's take hot flashes. So hot flashes, unresolved, become full-blown panic surges. Fatigue becomes adrenal collapse. Mood swings become emotional crises. Insomnia becomes existential unraveling. And that's not because menopause itself. It's because the nervous system, based on our subconscious programming, is maxed out. See, unresolved trauma sensitizes the nervous system. It heightens our perception of danger, increased reactivity, and it inhibits our body's ability to process change. That's why women with trauma histories often have more intense symptoms, longer transitions, or a greater difficulty accessing support or regulation during menopause. See, the menopausal window becomes a trauma trigger until the subconscious threat is resolved. Remember, at Mind Change, we don't see menopause as a problem. So we don't fix menopause. We help heal the nervous system so that the body can do what it was designed to do. We use neuroscience-based tools to rewire those subconscious programs that keep our bodies in stress. We restore felt safety in the body, which allows hormones to shift without triggering emotional collapse. Because when your nervous system is supported, menopause becomes a portal, not a prison. So let's talk about some of the most common childhood emotional experiences that can lay the groundwork for what we're seeing out there be described as like a typical chaotic menopausal transition. So one of the most common ones is parentification or early responsibility. So for instance, if you had to grow up fast, care for others, or suppress your own needs to survive, your nervous system likely runs on hyper-responsibility and control. Menopause then becomes terrifying, not just physically, but emotionally, because it threatens your identity as the one who holds everything and everyone together. Another very common one is suppressed anger and emotional disappearance. So let's say that you were raised and taught to be nice, agreeable, obedient, or emotionally neutral to be accepted. Little girls who become women who weren't allowed to express anger or needs as a child often hit what might be referred to as a rage wall during menopause. What that is decades of silenced truth surfacing. That often happens in our liver. And so we have liver detox symptoms, and we see hormonal shifts and emotional memory all converging, all coming out at once. This is where we get a lot of the hot flash symptoms. What those are repressed rage, bubbling up, firing up to the surface. They're not there to torture us. They're there to awaken us. At an age, at a time in our life where we're not dealing with our children as much anymore, at least not within the home. We're not probably trying to start our careers or start a marriage or a household that we're trying to keep together. At this stage, we should be focusing on ourselves in a lot of ways if we hadn't before. we should be understanding more about ourselves, being able to take a look back and forward at the same time. And for women who are doing that, oftentimes a lot of stuff comes up. A lot of stuff comes up to the surface that we were not able to look at or deal with before. Another childhood emotional driver there would be unworthiness, or that performance-based love. If your worth was based on achievements, looks, or being good, menopause or the onset of menopause can feel like punishment. As the body changes and productivity shifts, what we don't realize is that it becomes a threat to a subconscious belief. That subconscious belief is, if I'm not beautiful, useful, high performing, then I'm nothing. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of attention. Now, again, this is subconscious. So we don't have a lot of people, women in their late 40s and 50s, who are going around thinking this, but it does contribute to this narrative out there that our goal is to stay beautiful, stay looking young, stay being vibrant. Now, I'm all for those things, but if it's to support a belief that if I'm not those things, I'm not useful, I'm no longer relevant, I no longer deserve love, well, that will create immense internal resistance, grief, and shame. Another contributing factor is generational beliefs around womanhood. Many women unconsciously absorb their mother's or grandmother's unhealed beliefs. And if you grew up in a family where women didn't deal with aging in a communicative way, or if they dealt with it in a negative way, where maybe you internalized, and oftentimes these things are not said, they're observed, where aging is decline. So maybe the women in your family blamed anything that was inconvenient within their bodies on aging. The reduced capacity to move maybe, or see or hear or do things that brought them joy was because I'm getting old. And getting old means slowing down. Then you received the message that aging is decline. Or as the women in your family aged, it may have meant that they were no longer attractive. So you may have started to hear comments as a little person that you weren't even aware of at the time, but that you stored subconsciously, about women speaking about their bodies increasingly in a negative way. The sagging, the dragging, all of those different things that we blame on age, or we blame on the transition in life. If the women in your family had I must keep going no matter what, that even at this age when maybe children are out of the home and careers are either very well set or even coming to an end, or looking towards retirement, that there is still this, I must keep going, I must keep cranking out, kind of that sort of culture. Or they get involved in taking care of everyone else in some other way. They start serving in a capacity at a church or in a service or some way that is keeping them going. Now, again, I am all for keeping going, keeping active, staying active. But that's a little bit different than being busy. Keep going, because if we don't keep going, if we don't have others to take care of, put above ourselves, then we are no longer worthy or no longer relevant. Well, that is creating a culture that lets us vilify menopause and the transition, because we're transitioning into possibly not being able to do those things as well. Now, not because our bodies should be in that state, but because of a constant stress that we've been holding is affecting our body. And if we see that as a degeneration and a degeneration of our worth and value, well, that triples the amount of stress hormones that we are producing. So then menopause feels like insult to energy. Without these kind of childhood narratives or beliefs being questioned, they become programs. And when the body stops cooperating with these programs, we tend to panic. At least our body panics with symptoms. Another belief is there might be no safe place to fall apart. So this might be the most common wound we see with women. Women who never had permission to collapse, grieve, ask for help, receive support. So when the nervous system demands that now is time for us to focus on us, to look at us, the body fights it. Menopause isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to liberate us from being who we had to be to survive when we didn't know any better, when we didn't have the tools, or we thought we didn't have the time. The more unprocessed emotion that is stored in the system, the louder the body has to speak during this transition. With Mind Change, that's what we're doing. And we're trying to help people younger and younger and younger so that they don't have to navigate this particular transition with so much baggage. We look to help surface, validate, and rewire those childhood narratives and programs so that menopause becomes less of a collapse and more of a clarifying evolution. So while menopause is a physical transition, it also acts as an emotional detonator. It stirs up buried truths that the body has held in silence, often for decades or even generations. So there are 3 of the most powerful subconscious themes that I've recognized emerge from women who are really struggling with the stage of life, perimenopause to menopause. And the first one is this loss of identity, which if we're thinking about it, I think it's actually really good that we question where our identity came from up to this age. Question some of the ways that we may have been operating subconsciously, unconsciously. Menopause is asking us, and perimenopause is asking us to do this. If we've never done this before, then this is a lot to deal with at this stage of life. So let's look into this, a loss of identity. So often that comes with, who am I without, right? Who am I without children to raise? Who am I without the youthful body that I once had? Who am I without the energy to do it all, right? For many women, identity has been built on those roles: caretaker, performer, fixer, doer, the beautiful one, the dependable one. All of those things are identities that oftentimes people don't know that they're operating out of. And it becomes so narrow that it informs everything that we do. So as hormones begin to shift and energy may dip to figure out how to make up for or meet the new hormonal demand, those identities and those roles begin to unravel. Remember, this isn't failure. It's an invitation to step into who you are without the costumes, the roles, the labels, to be a self, not just a function. But if identity has always been externalized, this unraveling can feel like a death, because in many ways it is. It's the death of the woman that you had to be to survive. Another really common thing that we see come up is the fear of irrelevance. This kind of idea of am I disappearing? In a culture obsessed with youth, menopause carries a cultural curse. You're no longer valuable. I mean, we see it in advertising, healthcare, Hollywood, and oftentimes even in our own families. It creates subconscious fear that we're going to be invisible, that our voice won't matter anymore, that our worth will expire with our cycle, that beauty is youth, power is youth. But here's the truth. That fear isn't yours. I mean, it's not the belief that was built into us originally. It's programming. In matriarchal and indigenous cultures, that phase of life was where a woman's true power emerged. At Mind Change, we help dismantle the inherited shame and rewrite a core belief of, I will grow more powerful and wise and essential with age. Another really common thing that we see is buried rage. Now, I talked about this a little bit before, but this idea of all of the things that we didn't speak up about before, or that we were trained into believing, or that limited us in our family structures or our jobs or our cultural structures. And that is the thing that comes up is kind of like, I've held it in long enough. So many women spend their first 40 years swallowing the truth, doubling down on these identity beliefs. And oftentimes that leads to people staying quiet to avoid conflict, smiling when they want to scream, saying yes when their bodies say no. And I'll go even further with that to say most women, it was my case, most women I know, were actually taught to disconnect from their bodies, disconnect from many ways, that our bodies weren't to be trusted, especially around sexuality, that somehow our relationship with our sexual self was something to be feared, hidden. And it begins this narrative that there might be something wrong with our bodies. Now, estrogen, which buffers emotional reactivity, in our later years, it does naturally begin to decline. And it's kind of like a broken dam. The truth floods in. So little rumblings of, I'm tired of being responsible for everything, or I've sacrificed too much, or I don't even know who I am anymore, or what I want anymore. I'm angry and I'm not hiding it. See, that's actually not dysfunction. It's the body finally detoxing decades of emotional suppression. And sometimes that does come out violently. Now, the goal isn't to suppress it again. It's to meet that rage with reverence and transmute it into clarity, boundaries, and rebirth. Menopause is not the end of you. It's the end of the performance and the beginning of your most sovereign self. Menopause isn't just a physical shift. It's a reckoning, a kind of internal audit where your nervous system asks, what have I been carrying that no longer belongs to me? So it plays out in a lot of different ways. Unprocessed wounds will surface. So many women find themselves suddenly crying over things that they thought were healed, or replaying moments from childhood or past relationships or motherhood. They may revisit old betrayals, abandonment, or regret. But see, this is not regression. It's integration. Now, ideally, we would have been taught to deal with these things younger. We would have been challenging these narratives. And that's what we're trying to do in Mind Change, is help equip people earlier so that they're not relying on a life stage like this to finally give us permission to feel, to speak, to have every emotion. See, as we enter into this stage of life, our body is no longer under the influence of all of the fertility-centered hormones. Those hormones start to serve different purposes. And sometimes within that shift comes the message, now we deal with what you didn't have time to feel. The veil between conscious and subconscious starts to thin. And it becomes a perfect storm, or the perfect time to do deep emotional healing. Sometimes maybe for the first time you realize you've never been truly rested. You've never been emotionally supported. You've never asked for what you want because you didn't know you were allowed to. As estrogen declines, so does your tolerance for self-abandonment. It becomes harder to perform, to tolerate imbalance, to pretend. Your system starts rejecting what once felt normal, not because you're broken, because you're finally beginning to wake up. And those internal contradictions can't be ignored. For decades, many women live with split narratives. I'm powerful, but I'm not allowed to take up too much space. Like, I'm intelligent, but still I defer to others. Or I want rest, but I feel guilty when I stop. So these inner contradictions, if we hold on to these for years and years and years, they are exhausting, and menopause exposes them. And if it's not addressed, it can lead to what we think culturally are these like crazy menopause symptoms. People are losing their minds, right? It can lead to rage or major mood fluctuations, burnout, breakdown, pain, actual pain within the body. But with tools like Mind Change, these moments become doorways to honesty, to coherence, to deep emotional alignment. So menopause, in truth, is a sacred sorting process. What gets to stay? What must go? And what parts of yourself are you finally ready to return home to? This is why many women say it was the hardest time of my life, but it was the beginning of me finally living on my own. Now, there's another aspect to subconscious programming that we need to consider other than just childhood trauma. So let's talk about the stories that we don't even know that we've absorbed. Because by the time most of women reach midlife, they've internalized 1,000 invisible messages about what it means to be valuable, lovable, and acceptable as a woman. Menopause doesn't create the identity crisis. It exposes one that was always there. So without even realizing it, we're carrying things like we've already talked about, my worth is in my youth, or being desirable equals being safe. Another one is that if I can't have children, I'm less of a woman. Or if I chose not to have children, then I have less value in this world. Or I need to stay small, quiet, and pleasing. Or probably one of the biggest ones is that my needs come last. Now, it's important to remember that these aren't conscious mantras. They're subconscious survival rules inherited from mothers, media, medicine, and the systems and cultures that we've grown up in. When menopause strips away the ability to perform, hustle, or maintain a certain image, then those rules begin to collapse. What rises instead is grief, rage, identity disorientation. Not because menopause is a loss, but because our self-worth was built on conditions that were never true. Now, here's an important tip. The brain doesn't know it's cultural. So here's the neuroscience kicker. Your brain encodes repeated messages as truth, whether they come from trauma or from advertising. So when the culture tells you that aging is decline, that menopause is invisibility, that softness equals weakness, then our brain and body records it. It prepares for rejection. And then it resists the transition, even if the soul is ready. So this inner split creates massive tension because part of you longs to slow down, speak up, stop performing, and be sovereign. But another part believes that if we do, we'll lose our place in the tribe. That's why symptoms spike. Not just because of hormones, but because your identity is fighting for its life. Beneath the biology, beyond the symptoms, menopause is a sacred initiation. It's a symbolic rite of passage, not into decline, but into deep creative power. So in mythology, many feminine deities are creators and destroyers. In Hinduism, we have Kali, and in Pele, or in Hawaiian tradition, there's Pele. They're not dark figures. They're clearing forces. They tear down what is false so that something more aligned can rise. Menopause often brings this energy forward. It burns away inauthentic relationships. It dismantles old coping strategies. It erupts with long buried truth. It isn't dysfunction, it's initiation by fire. So across ancient traditions, postmenopausal women were revered as visionaries, healers, truth tellers, keepers of community and intuition, often called the crone archetype. It isn't a withering figure. She's fully embodied, no longer pulled outward by fertility cycles. She becomes inwardly resourced. Menopause clears the path for unapologetic wisdom. It's the moment when the external doing gives way to the deep inner knowing or being. But in our culture, where productivity and youth are worshipped, this role has been distorted and silenced. Mind Change invites women to reclaim the archetype, not as an aesthetic, but as a frequency, a way of being that says, I no longer perform for belonging. I am the authority now. So also in our history or in other cultures, we have the phoenix, right? The metamorphosis in motion. Perhaps it's the most accurate metaphor for menopause, the phoenix, because she burns down and then she resurrects, not as who she was, but as who she's always been becoming. And like the phoenix, you don't need to explain your fire. You only need to trust that your ashes are sacred. Menopause is not the end. It's a spiritual molting, a shedding of outdated identities and unspoken pain and survival roles. It is not easy. It's often not tidy, but it is profound. And these aren't just thoughts. They're not just thoughts that we're addressing. So it isn't just our thoughts that we want to change around menopause. It's the neural patterns. It's the things that we've been wired with since we were little girls, that we've carried for generations and generations. The things that we've rehearsed for decades. They shape hormone regulation, inflammation, sleep, digestion, immunity, and pain sensitivity. If we don't rewire them, your body will try to compensate through symptoms. But when you change the internal narrative, when you stop fighting your biology and start working with it, then everything can change without so much flair. And that's what the Mind Change method is built for. Because menopause shouldn't require us to tough it out. We've survived enough up into this point. We shouldn't have to survive another thing. What it's really asking us to do is to go within, rewrite, and rise. Remember, neurobiologically, all of these shifts in the hormone cycles actually support neuroplasticity. It's a unique time of life that women get to go through, that we get to level up, rise above. So let's just shift gears for a moment and talk about a little bit more about how menopause is currently being treated, both traditionally and through emerging modalities. Because the truth is, out there, women aren't lacking options. If anything, we're drowning in them. So many stories, so many treatments, so many things about menopause. And they often come without context or clarity. So from hormone therapy to SSRIs to trendy biohacks, there's a lot of stuff out there. But the real question is, are these treatments truly addressing the root of what's happening? Or are they just helping us white knuckle our way through this massive transformation? So let's talk about maybe one of the most common things out there, HRT or hormone replacement therapy, because it is one of the most talked about tools right now, and for good reason. Research over the past decade has evolved dramatically We know now that when HRT is started within 10 years of menopause, then it reports supporting brain health, improved bone density, reduced cardiovascular risk, and drastically easing hot flashes, night sweats, and mood swings. Now, I would say that is because you are starting to pay attention. You're starting to treat yourself. You're starting to be more aware of your hormones and how they are involved with our day-to-day workings, doings. So is it the replacing of the hormones, or is it the attention that we are finally starting to bring within? Now, there's promising research from someone named Dr. Lisa Mosconi, and she shows that through her research that estrogen acts as a neuroprotectant. So it protects our body against brain fog and cognitive decline. She is also a neuroscientist, though, and is reframing menopause as a neurological renovation, not just hormonal decline. So what some of her studies have revealed is that the estrogen receptors in our brain increase postmenopausally. Why does this matter as we're talking about HRT? Very often we're being asked to get in and give ourselves synthetic hormones to deal with all of the perceived symptoms that might be coming with menopause. But what this shows is that post-menopause, we actually increase estrogen receptors. So yes, there is a decrease in estrogen production, but that's met with an increase in estrogen receptors. So is it possible that we might be balancing that out naturally if we are not putting so much extra stress on our bodies from what we've been carrying from trauma and unresolved things, which might be creating more of an estrogen dip before moving into menopause? Now, using cutting edge PET imaging, Dr. Mosconi found that as estrogen levels drop, then the brain increases estrogen receptor density. So it's upregulating the sensitivity in key emotional and cognitive areas. So again, that suggests that the brain is actively working to compensate for a hormonal loss, trying in a way to stay hormonally nourished. Research also shows proof that there is a distinct brain renovation process happening during menopause. So again, Dr. Mosconi's imaging research shows that the brain undergoes dynamic changes in structure, connectivity, metabolism, and blood flow during this transition. And that's separate from normal aging, right? So think of it like a neuroplastic renovation window, a season of reshaping that could be leveraged if we know how to support it wisely. Now, many women, again, let me just say, in Mind Change, we are not against medication as a whole. Very often, these are bridges for people if they're seen as bridges. But that involves finding a provider who thinks likewise. So if you find yourself at these stages and you need a little bit of HRT to rebalance, then we're not vilifying that to any degree. But what if we can start to do that a little bit more thoughtfully previous to these stages? Maybe in perimenopause, maybe as we approach this, or even for women who are right in the midst of a perceived negative view of their menopause journey. Well, what if we can support what the body's already trying to do by helping you rewire your brain in this really lovely neuroplastic window? we must simultaneously address trauma, stress, and subconscious beliefs so that brain fuel connects with a body that knows how to receive it. See, HRT isn't a magic bullet. There are risks, especially with long-term or oral use, including increased chance of blood clots in certain cancers, depending on your age, delivery method, and family history. And for many women, especially trauma survivors, putting synthetic hormones in the body can often feel like giving up control or ignoring deeper layers of healing. At Mind Change, we always say you can choose pharmaceutical interventions from empowerment, not fear, as long as they're being used as a bridge to help return the body back to a powerful state, right? Return power back to the body and not the drug or hormone. Now, as we discuss emotional, subconscious, and nervous system roots of menopause, we have to understand that stress makes symptoms dramatically more intense. So some research that we can look at there is from Dr. Esther Sternberg, a pioneer in brain immune science. Her work confirms that chronic stress literally recalibrates our biochemistry, fueling inflammation, hormonal chaos, and nervous system reactivity at exactly the moment that our bodies most need resilience. Physician and former National Institute of Health neuroendocrine immune researcher, Dr. Sternberg decodes how stress and emotions affect the immune system, clearly demonstrating the biological bridges between the mind, body, and environment. Her research shows that chronic stress robs the body of resilience and the fuel necessary during perimenopause. And that can mirror the exact issues and patterns that we see come later with full-blown menopause as being symptoms that feel intolerable, right? These are exactly the things that Mind Change works on addressing and healing. So let's talk about another very common treatment to menopause currently, and that is SSRIs, or commonly known as antidepressants. They are very commonly prescribed when mood, anxiety, or sleep go off the rails during perimenopause. Now, these meds are often prescribed to help with hot flashes, mood volatility, and other symptoms even in full-blown menopause. But here's what most people don't hear. SSRIs have side effects: lowered libido, emotional numbness, and in some studies, a potential in reduction in bone density in midlife women. They often also dull emotional range, numbing joy, passion, and aliveness. This is actually an underlying cause of menopause. So the things that people are being prescribed to treat are often the things that are leading to the symptoms in the first place. Feeling numb, feeling purposeless, passionless, right? Menopause is asking you to reevaluate this state of being, not double down on it. They also carry a risk of long-term reliance. When symptoms return after stopping, many people feel dependent on the medication to even feel normal. Often for people whose normal wasn't so great in the first place. SSRIs treat symptoms. They don't rewire the underlying systems, because real healing during menopause isn't about suppressing. That's what we were doing the whole time. It's about reclaiming. And SSRI use, long-term use or long-term dependency without the deeper work is only a temporary mask. When you don't resolve the emotional programs that created dysregulation in the first place, then it just leads to further shutdown. Now, there are also a lot of new drugs emerging, a lot of hormonal meds that target hot flashes or other symptoms directly through brain signaling. Now, listen to that. Through brain signaling. Clearly, hot flashes are coming from the brain if they can be altered through brain signaling. But again, These are surface level fixes, synthetic approaches to what we were designed to do naturally. They help manage the symptoms, not decode the deeper messages. So things like nervous system work, breath work, mindfulness, they're all gaining traction too. And yay, and for good reason, because they help regulate mood and reduce stress, which has a downstream effect on hormones and inflammation. But if your subconscious mind still believes things like rest is weakness, my worth is in how much I can give or do, or it's not safe to be seen in my full power, then no therapy or pill will override that. That is what menopause is asking, is for that override. If you are trying to synthetically override that, your body's going to create symptoms that try to get your attention, that is not what it was after. We look to get to the source code of your experience. We don't want to just manage symptoms. We work within the subconscious patterns that are driving them. Now, for some women, there's a strong underlying program of wanting to be rescued, helped, taken care of. I get that. Honestly, those were some of the secondary gains that I was receiving from doing years and years of chronic illness, because we should have those things. We should be able to be helped, be taken care of, to be receiving all the good things, right? We should have never been without. But going back and listening to those messages that we received early on that are counterintuitive to that, and then giving ourselves what we needed back then, is going to have a profound impact on how we move forward. But it also makes sense that some individuals want outside help. And that's where these bridges come in. Use HRT if it feels aligned. Talk to your doctor. Nourish your body. If your testosterone is bottomed out, it's often due to feeling the need to carry yourself in a masculine energy for too long, doing all the things for everyone all the time. There are ways to supplement that in the meantime. But don't forget that menopause is not just a hormonal shift. It's an invitation to rewrite the programs that your body can no longer carry. Because when the mind changes, the symptoms don't have to scream anymore. This is the work beneath the work. Many menopausal symptoms are your body's way of resurfacing long-held traumas or beliefs. Memory reconsolidation allows you to interrupt old loops and install new truth, not with willpower, but with neuroscience. This is how we collapse identity structures like, I'm too much, I can't stop, I have to be needed to be loved. When these dissolved, the symptoms that once you clung to, they often do too. So here's what I want to leave you with today. If you're walking through perimenopause or menopause right now, maybe feeling unrecognizable in your own body, questioning your mind, or wondering if somehow you're broken, please hear me clearly. You are not broken. You are becoming. What looks like chaos is often transformation in disguise. Yes, your hormones are shifting. Yes, your brain is recalibrating. But far more than a psychological event, this is a spiritual and subconscious reordering of everything you've outgrown so that you can finally inhabit your body, your voice, and your truth without apology. Menopause is not the end. It's the beginning of an unfiltered you. It's the moment your body stops tolerating what it used to endure. It's the moment your nervous system demands healing, not performance. It's the moment your soul whispers, no more pretending. And while traditional medicine offers tools like HRT, SSRIs, and other things, those can be part of the journey. But please remember, they're not the whole story, because true healing requires a deeper lens, one that asks, what is my body trying to tell me? What beliefs or patterns am I finally ready to let go of? And who might I become when I stop suppressing and start listening? At Mind Change, we believe healing isn't about fighting your body. It's about partnering with it, rewiring survival patterns, releasing inherited pain, and remembering that your body is wildly intelligent and always on your side. So, if this episode stirred something in you, if it gave you language for what you felt but couldn't name, if you thought, wait, that's me, then this is your invitation to go deeper. Share this episode with someone you love. Start a conversation, or come find us at Mind Change to explore courses, retreats, tools that we've created to walk you through this process, not with shame, but with reverence. You don't have to lose yourself to heal. You get to meet yourself, maybe for the first time. And that, to me, is the most powerful kind of change. Until next time, thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to ask different questions. And thank you for being a part of a movement that is finally redefining what it means to heal. This is the Mind Change Podcast, where we are changing the world one mind at a time.